Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
Hey,
How are you, Corey?
and good.
Good, good, good. Good to hear it.
I apologize, man. I got some construction going in my whole house, so I found a little corner in the basement. This is
No,
stove
it's
plant.
okay. Understood, understood. Okay, so I guess we can get started. Let's jump right on in. For all of you who may not know me, my name is Rico Washington, and I am one of the team leads with Street Riders NYC. If you've not heard of Street Riders NYC, I'll give you a quick rundown of who we are. Street Riders NYC is a collective, a movement, and a community born in the streets of New York City that coalesced in protest and connected during the social unrest surrounding the police killings of unarmed Black citizens in the spring of 2020. Street Riders NYC has a collective interest in cycling to protest while providing cycling support and protection to other protest groups across the city, focusing on issues of justice for the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, as well as police reform, racial equity, equality, and community direct action. You can follow us across all platforms at Street Riders NYC. That's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I'll go right ahead and introduce our panelists for today, starting with none other than Corey Pegues. So before we get into that, let's just talk briefly or just give you a basic understanding of what we'll be discussing today. Today's topic will be about the Defund, Abolish the Police movement that has gained a lot of traction over the past 9 to 12 months. And we're going to break down what that means, what we want, and what we should consider when we speak about these things. So with that being said, without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists for today. First off being Corey Pegues. So Corey is a Queens native, Queens, New York, that is, and he's a retired NYPD executive, author, motivational speaker, community leader, and expert on police-related topics. He's also a former member of the New York National Guard and a U.S. Army veteran where he served as a medical specialist. He was also an adjunct professor at Monroe College's Criminal Justice Department for 5 years. In May of 2016, Corey authored his first book, Once a Cop, which was published by Atria Books and was met with critical acclaim. As former president and founder of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, Corey has organized various community events and has held a leading role in raising money to support local schools. He is also a founding member of the National Coalition of Justice Practitioners, which recently petitioned the U.S. Department of Justice to hold local law enforcement agencies accountable to report officers who participated in the U.S. Capitol attack on January 6. Corey has also fought for the rights of others in making sure that their civil liberties are being protected. His latest venture is A Cops and Robbers Story, a documentary film recently screened at the Doc NYC Film Festival that chronicles his beginnings as a member of New York City's infamous Supreme Team Gang and his transition into a long and decorated career in law enforcement. Corey is a graduate of St. Joseph's College with a BS in Organizational Management, an MPS in Criminal Justice Leadership from St. John's University, and a postgraduate certificate from the Police Management Institute at Columbia University. Our next panelist is Carmen Rivera. Carmen is an adjunct professor for the Criminal Justice Department at Seattle University. As a passionate advocate for criminal justice reform, she believes in the power of knowledge and the right to education. A native of the South Seattle region of Washington State, she earned a BA with departmental honors from Seattle University in criminal justice. She then continued her education at the University of Liverpool in England, where she earned an MS in forensic psychology. Upon completing her graduate studies, she returned to Seattle, where she began working as a counselor at the Echo Glen Children's Center, a juvenile rehabilitation institution for juvenile offenders. She subsequently served as a juvenile rehabilitation coordinator, which enabled her to focus on transition and reentry programming for the youth. As a counselor, she became proficient in dialectic behavioral therapy, DBT. After obtaining the position of coordinator, Carmen developed a particular interest in educating staff and youth in equity, diversity, and inclusion, also known as EDI. Carmen is currently an active certified EDI trainer for the state of Washington's Department of Social and Health Services Rehabilitation Administration. She has also published several editorials in the South Seattle Emerald. Thank you to both of our very, very generous panelists today for their time and their expertise. And we'll just jump right on into the discussion. What we want and what we mean: defund, abolish the police. So the first topic to the panel will be, most folks, they really only just heard of the terms defund and abolish the police over the past 9 to 12 months. Is there a history of abolition and defunding movements that predate 2020?
Ladies first, I'll
Well,
defer.
thank you, Corey. I appreciate that. Absolutely. There is a huge history in American history of abolition of both the prisons and the police. The abolition movement that we're familiar with really came out of the police abolition or the prison abolition movement. And about 85 years ago, I believe it was W.E.B. Du Bois who coined the term abolition democracy in his book, Black Reconstruction, which would describe the fight to finish what the abolition of slavery wasn't able to do, and the start of Reconstruction after that fact was not able to do due to Jim Crow laws. And so it was really because of the creation of prisons and police that the idea of abolition came about.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation. Corey, did you have anything to add?
No, I mean, that's the very early origins, but yeah, most recently, there's been a lot of police departments that's been trying to abolish or was forced to abolish their police departments due to funding. Like in California, like a police department they just couldn't pay the police anymore, and so they just had to abolish the police department. And that has happened in several cities around the country, and some of them downsized. Instead of having 50 officers, they had to go down to 5. I know there's a small town upstate New York where I'm at. They went down to 1 police officer, just 1 sheriff. So that has been going up. But the defunding, abolishing we're talking about is this whole different new phenomenon since the Black Lives Matter movement.
Okay. So you mentioned upstate New York. I want to put a pin in that conversation. I want to get back to that because there's something I want to ask you about upstate and policing. But the next question I want to ask you is about the debate about the language of these movements, the defunding or the abolition movements. Most famously recently outlined in the contrast and arguments of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Barack Obama in their public statements. But the debate, it seems to be an outgrowth of a divide between like the intention and the misconception. So what are the misconceptions of what people think abolition and defunding means? And does the language around these movements really have the ability to impede like the support for them? And flatly, like, should we change the language?
Yeah, so I think we should definitely change the language, because when you're saying abolish, defund, people that's not of like a normal mind, they're interpreting that as we're going to get rid of the police. And my position of growing up in a low socioeconomic area where the police were like the rulers, they was very corrupt, and then being a cop for 21 years and seeing the inner workings and knowing that the entire criminal justice system is slanted toward Black and brown people. It is what it is. So do we need to abolish it? Yes, we do. But we need to have something right immediately after that. I know Carmen will talk about Seattle. All we have to do is look like we're not recreating any wheels here. You can just look at Seattle, where they gave up, she'll probably talk about it later, a few mile area, no police, and it's rampant crime, rapes, robberies, murder. It's just chaotic up there. And I'm all for changing it. And I think later in the conversation, we'll talk about Camden, New Jersey, which is something that, police departments around the country should be looking at when you're talking about abolishing the police department. I have no problem with it, but I don't like the word. I'm more of reconstruct. Reconstruct police and reconstruct the criminal justice system. And I'm a part of this group. I don't want to say the group because I'm about to get out of this group, because 2 of the main members are just, every time we're on these Zooms, they're like, just get rid of the police, get rid of the police. And I'm saying, well, what's the alternative? Because Nana and my grandbabies, somebody has to have something in place to look at them. So if we're gonna have a real conversation with real educated people, I don't care. Let's abolish them. I'm all for the way the criminal justice system is set up now. Let's abolish it. But we need to have something immediately in place to take over what we got rid of. And that's just my position of being in law enforcement for over 28 years.
Thanks, Corey. What about you, Carmen? How do you feel?
I historically have been torn by it because my father was a Seattle police officer for almost 40 years. And to backtrack to actually your first question, because I don't want to be, I would be remiss without mentioning Angela Davis and Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who are key figures in the abolition movement. And I really recommend for anyone who wants to learn more about them to read their work, watch what they've produced and the work that, and the education that they've spread. But I understand, like Obama has mentioned, that it's a snappy slogan, right? And that you alienate a lot of people when you say abolish or defund the police. However, I'm not against changing it. And the reason for that is because it grabs people's attention. It gets people paying attention and listening. We have more of a conversation happening now around defunding and abolishing the police than we've ever had in the last 75, 85 years. There has been more movement actually towards defunding police officers and police departments now than there has been. And I think that's entirely because, in addition to what happened with last summer with George Floyd and the BLM movement, but also because we are demanding to abolish and defund the police, or defund and abolish the police. And it catches people's attention, it makes people ask why, and it gets people's blood boiling. And that's where you really see change and innovation take place, is where people get very invested and you get a lot of passionate opinions about a single issue. And so I don't believe we need to reframe it. I think people need to understand it and understand for what it is. When I say defund the police, I don't want overfunding of police departments anymore in my city. I don't want to be overfunding police departments more so than we're funding education or healthcare or housing or mental health. And when I say I want to abolish the police, it's because I want to work towards a better America, a better society that doesn't look at police as the Band-Aid for all of our problems. In reality, they're a short-term solution for a long-term problem. When we want to look at the root of violent crime or crime in general, we need to look at what causes crime and deconstruct crime. And if we were to maybe shift all of the money that we put towards a short-term solution, i.e. policing, and put it towards long-term solutions like mental health care, regular health, normal health care, housing, education, mental, all of these important things that attribute to crime, then we can make the police obsolete, which is what my goal is in saying abolish the police, is working towards a society where the police are obsolete. And when I was preparing for this conversation, I was on a run and I was thinking, there's always this like argument that, you know, you're a young woman on a run. Don't you want the police there to protect you so some vile monster doesn't come and attack you? I want to be in a society where misogyny doesn't take place, where I have to hold my keys in between my hands in protection of in case an assailant wants to come and attack me. The police are going to help me in that moment if I'm being attacked on a run. They're not on every street corner watching me on my run. That's not the reality. If I'm attacked, that's a result of the misogyny that's built in our society and the rape culture that is built in our society. The police aren't going to solve that, and they haven't solved that. I believe almost 2/3 of sexual assaults aren't even reported to law enforcement. So the fear-mongering tactic that we need to police for safety is valid. And I want to work towards a society where we don't need the police, where we can make them obsolete.
I made some really interesting points there. So the next question would be more about, I guess, so many people are saying that like police reform is a more reasonable ask versus abolition or defunding. Again, we're going back to the language around it and what makes people feel more comfortable and what makes people want to engage more, I guess. But the opposing side of that argument is to point to like Minnesota, that, you know, funded a $12 million statewide police reform training program after Philando Castile was murdered in a suburb of Minneapolis. And then, you know, in 2020, you have George Floyd, who was murdered in Minneapolis proper. So does police reform actually work, is my question.
Well, you know, as a police officer, I just want to just put this out there really quick so people understand that. So when Philando Castile was murdered, when George Floyd was murdered, Eric Garner, so on and so forth, that day, there were millions and millions of police contacts that happened and no one was viciously murdered. I have to say that because I am a cop. I do have blue blood in my vein, good blue blood, okay? So there's a lot of cops that's doing the right things, but there's a whole bunch also that's doing the wrong thing. So again, it's all about the balance. Like the last question, how Carmen answered, like she really knocked it right out of the box. The language, I do believe the language needs to be changed, but we also need to be, people need to be uncomfortable, like Carmen said. It's a very uncomfortable conversation because just think about it, like I could use the NYPD. It's been in existence since 1845. So what have they been passing down since 1845? There was no Hispanics, there was no Blacks, there was no Asians in policing at that time. So, you know, like in 92, when I became a cop, my partner was Irish. His father came in a job in the 70s and his grandfather came in the 50s, and he's giving me tips in the 90s. And I'm like, Brian, no, we don't do that no more. That's over. But you know, minorities are 2-3 generations behind in policing. We just really got on like in the 90s. But that conversation of abolishing and defunding, I'm all for defunding. Let me just tell you this. You can't, what we've been doing since the Reagan era, the war on drugs, right?
Mm-hmm.
What we doing today? The war on drugs. I don't know if your listeners know, I just started this documentary on Netflix called Crack, a very big documentary talking about the crack era. And we still, that was 30 some years ago, 40 years, we still doing it. You can't arrest your way out of drug addiction. You can't do it. So we've been doing it and it's not working. Defund, I say get rid of all of those TNT narcotics. We know ain't no cocoa leaf plants in America. We know there's no cocoa leaf plants in America. How's the cocaine get here? So we're gonna leave it to the local police to figure out because, you know, somebody sold a dime of crack or a half an ounce or whatever. Nah, that's, when you arrest a crackhead, all you're doing is send them to jail to smoke more crack, and he or she's gonna come out and continue crack. The only way it's gonna go down is with education, counseling, and treatment. That's it. So we could take all our money from this war on drugs, demilitarization of the police department, which I think we're going to talk about later, and dealing with emotionally disturbed people. And I'll sum it up like this. You look at in Oregon, they have this program called CAHOOTS, CAHOOTS. It's been over 20 years, I think, Carmen, right? At least 20 years. When they have a call for emotionally disturbed person, they don't send the cops. They send mental health professionals to go to the scene first. And obviously, if there's a call with a male, black, white, he has a gun, the cops are going to respond. Now, if they don't have a weapon, you send mental health professionals there. And if they can't handle it, they'll call the police and the police show up to the team. Because every time a cop kills an unarmed person that have medical conditions, I'm telling you this, and I don't know how this is gonna go off with you or your audience, I feel bad for the cop. You know why? Because they're sending them out there unprepared. They can't deal with it. 6 months in the police academy, you got use of force training, domestic violence training, driver's training, firearms training. Oh, and they throw in emotionally disturbed persons training. So you're dealing with what, 16, 18-hour block of training, and you send a mental health professional, he got a doctor's degree, a master's degree. There's no comparison. Cops don't know how to de-escalate somebody with a mental issue. They can't do it. So stop sending them there. Because every time those cops are scared. They're not like just going there to kill somebody, but when you got this 6'5" butt-naked person frothing at the mouth, talking about he getting ready to kill you, they don't know how to use the verbal judo to bring that situation down. So, you know, it, like Carmen said, hard conversation, but we need to have it. I love the dog.
I think it's a cat.
Yeah, this is my cat Diego. He just wants to be a part of the conversation as well.
Diego, appreciate all your input. But you mentioned something, Corey. So the 6 months, once that started to really make the rounds with regards to discussions about police and if there are adequate solutions to the problems that we face in society that they're responding to, a lot of people were unaware that to pass through the police academy is 6 months. Do you feel that?
I'm telling you 6 months because that's what I did in '92 in NYPD. Some police academies are 6 weeks, 12 weeks. And Carmen alluded to it earlier, police have become the dumping ground for everything. Cat in a tree, call the cops. Lady fell down, can't get up, call a cop. Emotionally disturbed person, call a cop. And I'm not even gonna lie, I had a raccoon in my garbage the other day. I didn't even know what to do. And guess what I did? I called the cops. And I'm advocating for not calling the cops. But we're so trained to call the police. And after I called them, I said, I can't believe I just called the cops for a raccoon in the garbage. But and this is somebody that has all of this law enforcement training. I'm constantly talking about stop calling the police for this little stuff, but it just like kicks in. Like they're the dumping ground for everything. Yeah. And in my perfect world, like Carmen was saying a little earlier, I would love for the police to just respond basically to the 7 major crimes: rape, robbery, homicide, stolen car. Like that's it. The 7 major crimes and all of this other stuff, give it to somebody else. Even car accidents, vehicle accidents, give it to a Department of Transportation somewhere in your municipality.
Yeah, good point. So you brought up earlier rather, Camden, New Jersey. So I just want to kind of like unpack that a little bit for everyone who's tuned in case they're unaware. So the city of Camden had actually dissolved its then existing police force, and this was due to widespread corruption, and just basically rebuilt it from the ground up. This was back in 2012. Though the population of Camden is, you know, it's a lot smaller than New York City, obviously, and most major cities across the country. But is there anything that these cities can learn from what Camden did with regard to the dissolution and rebuilding of its police department?
Carmen, you wanna get that, Carmen?
Yeah, I think that learning about Camden, reading more about Camden, I think it's hard because it's a different population and it's a smaller population and it's a different environment. I think when we talk about, reforming and what happened in Camden, I think it's very unique to every department in every city in every area, because again, we're dealing with such a huge country. Like, you both are in New York, I'm all the way over here in Seattle on the West Coast, and we have completely different cultures and ways of people interacting. And so I think there's a lot to learn that is possible. What we saw with Camden, I think crime went down 50% since 2012, since Camden basically abolished its police department and rebuilt it from the ground up. And they didn't abolish police, they basically did away with the police department and recreate it. They rehired only about 100 of the original police officers with a total of 400 police officers total, and emphasized de-escalation training, emphasized community representation. But it isn't perfect, right? They still have issues of a lot of police officers who don't actually live in Camden, New Jersey, who police Camden, New Jersey, which is an issue when we talk about police and policing reform. When we go back to reform, and this is the educator in me. And so I have to, when we talk about reform, Corey said something really that resonated with me. He's a good cop. My dad was a good cop. That blue blood, it's familial. And I was raised around a lot of good cops. I consider them family. And so when I educate and I preach about this or teach about this, it's not anything against them. It's nothing personal. It's entirely about the bigger scale of things of what's going on. And so if we just look at the philosophy kind of underlining reform, it's basically that more rules, more money, less violence, right? It's the idea if we give them more training, more money, more rules, more guidelines, more resources, if we just, essentially it's almost the opposite of defunding the police. Reform is about giving them more money so they can be more functional. But the thing is, we've seen the institution of policing in our society for almost 200 years, and we've put billions of dollars into policing. New York had in 1894 the Lexo Committee, which found like excessive abuse of power being implemented by the police force. Maybe 30, 40 years later, the Wickersham Commission, which was a national commission, found a lack of professionality among police officers. The Kerner Commission, again, another national commission in 1967, found that police actions were the final incident before the outbreak of violence in half of the incidences that they surveyed. And so we've seen over 50 years of reform, not a lot of change take place. And so when we see a place like Camden, New Jersey, that they're like, it's too bad, we're just going to completely do away with it. And it actually was a success. You look 7, 8 years later and crime has gone down, and there's a better function of actual community policing as explained by their residents. Like, so I think we can learn from Camden, New Jersey, that we don't have to shy away from this idea of like tearing it down to build it back up. I think that they're a really good example to say that it is possible if you just have the right plan and you're able to do it effectively in the right way. Which also brings to the point of like defunding the police. And I know we'll talk about this later, but a big part of defunding the police is seeing where we refund and reinvest in our communities. It's not about just taking the money away, it's about what you do with it and what we do with it effectively.
Corey, you have anything to add?
Yeah, my only issue with Camden, New Jersey, I think they did good. If we're talking baseball, I think they made it to third base, but they didn't make it home. Because when you look at the ethnic makeup of the county is like 75% minorities, 23% white, but they have like 90% white supervisors in the police department. So like somebody wasn't looking at the numbers, because the numbers just don't lie. And you know, that can in itself like cause some friction in the community when you are saying, hey, you know, you guys did this, you know, now you got a white police commissioner, you got 7 captains, only one of them is Black or Hispanics. Whoa, hold on. You know, you reconstructed it for your homeboys next door. Like what happened here? Gotcha. So I'm not totally against what they did. Like I said, in my, you know, opinion, they made it to third base, but I do think police departments should be reflective of the community in which they serve. I totally agree with that. You got 50% minorities, it should be 50% cops, good cops. Because I could name 50 Black and Hispanic cops I don't want coming to my house because they're bad. I don't want them coming. But I could name 50 white cops that I want to be the first responders to my house. So for me, it's not even about Black and white. It's all about just let's have some good cops. I don't care if a green cop knock on my door. As long as they treat me and my family with respect, that's what I'm looking for. The respect factor in treating our communities just like the others. Because we know last week a 9-year-old was maced upstate New York. And I could bet $1 to a donut it would have never happened to a 9-year-old white girl, ever.
That's what I actually wanted to put a pin in. I'm glad you brought it back up again. So with that taken into consideration for all those in attendance who might not be aware of what happened in Rochester, the police department were responding to a call that a 9-year-old girl was in distress and had, I believe, suicidal ideation. And there were probably like 5 cops for
15.
one 9-year-old, huh?
15.
50, oh, wow. Jeez. 15 cops for a 9-year-old girl, and she ended up in the back of a police cruiser, handcuffed, and they maced her. Like, what do we make of those types of situations when people are pushing back on either reform, abolishment, or defunding? Like, isn't that just another receipt for the actual advocation of all of those or one of those 3?
Well, listen, let's look at Rochester. This is the 3rd national incident, Carmen, and I think a year, national. This is a very small town in New York State. 3 national incidents. And what really gets to me is the mayor is Black, the police chief is Black, the executive officers are Black. So this is why I try to tell like minorities, because everybody says, oh, we need to put a minority in charge. Like, I don't just want a minority in charge. I need somebody that's going to be there. I don't care what color they are. They have to treat our community with respect. I actually know the police chief quite well out there in Rochester, but I'm of the mindset that maybe the feds need to come in and take the rug under Rochester right now. Because obviously the mayor and the police chief can't get it right. For a 9-year-old, you know, you use OC spray or what they call mace. You use that to gain a tactical advantage because you can't cuff this guy. So your partner's like, yo, get the mace, let's mace him, distract him, now we cuff him. You don't use it after somebody's cuffed and then you mace them, especially somebody 9 years old. And then you close the door, don't give her no medical attention. Nobody pulled a bottle of water out to drench our eyes. Like, there's so many different things, and I know we got other things to talk about, but and for me, having an 8-year-old, that one hit me real hard, real hard.
Carmen, did you have anything to add?
Yes, I think police killed 1,127 people in 2020. 28% of those people were Black, despite making up only about 13 to 15% of the population. So, and I'll out myself. I'm only 31 years old, and I am fed up with how many incidences of murder I've witnessed by police officers. And it's twofold for me, because like I mentioned, like I have family that are police officers, and the way it works is that when one person in a uniform messes up, everybody in uniform messes up. One cop represents all cops.
That's right.
That's how it works. And so you keep seeing these incidences, and we saw even more incidences over the summer. I saw a police officer in Montana that just knocked a guy down, walked right over him in the middle of a protest. I mean, we have endless amounts of receipts and evidence, video evidence of law enforcement just making bad decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is when they can determine between life and death and huge trauma, like I'm fed up at this point. And this is coming from like a cop's daughter. I'm fed up of seeing law enforcement screw up and have it affect people's livelihoods. And that's where I'll end that.
Absolutely. Corey, so you mentioned the documentary that you were in recently that's on Netflix. I encourage everybody to go out and watch it if you have not yet. It's called Crack. It's been on Netflix for, I think, maybe about 2.5 weeks, so it's pretty fresh. And it kind of outlines how the crack cocaine epidemic further crippled Black communities across the country. The documentary also discussed how many police forces across the country also became militarized during that time, which was a first, particularly in major cities that were hardest hit by the crack epidemic. But how did the militarization impact police budgets? Like, were these budgets like fortified? Were there like money just falling from the sky to get tanks and battle rams and things like this? Like, how did this play out?
Yeah, well, basically the war on drugs, once the war on drugs hit, and it was all because of February 1987, when this police officer was murdered in New York City called Eddie Byrne, while sitting in front of a witness house, guarding a witness. It was one of the most heinous crimes in American history that happened to a police officer. And at the time, President Bush his family gave President Bush his police shield. So when this gets to the White House is walking around with a dead, murdered cop's shield. And he said that this will stop. The war on drugs is now, let's get them. So police department budgets just started booming. Municipalities was taking money from from school and from education, drug treatment. They was taking all the money from, just think about this. And every municipality right now in America, the biggest budget is the police. At every town, the biggest budget is the police. I mean, I'm living here in New York City, the budget is $6 billion. People don't even believe that it's $6 billion for the police. And they just gave up $1 billion to defund for defunding last year. So now they have $5 more billion to go. That's more than education. It's more than drug treatment, everything. So these are the biggest budgets. And you can't just keep doing that. I don't know, when Mike Brown died and I saw tanks riding down the street in St. Louis, I thought it was Iraq out there. Where in America do we need armored vehicles with people hanging off with MP5 machine guns? And first of all, Mike Brown was already dead. So I don't even know who they was looking for with tanks rolling down the streets at MP5s.
Exactly.
Like, who is in charge? Who's doing these things? I was in the NYPD for 21 years, and you know, we had some very, very violent things. I've never seen our tank. But it's kind of unfair to compare because we got 40,000 police officers, or 50 when I was. But still, a tank in an urban environment, it doesn't make sense. Because what happens is they get the tank, they like it, say, hey, let's order another one. Oh, we got these automatic machine guns. Oh, let's order some more and more. And then the budget just goes, because everybody at the top wants to say that they did this for the police department.
Okay. Do you see at any point in the future a demilitarization of the police?
Oh, definitely. I definitely see that. I'm really optimistic because of this thing that we all have right here. This thing has changed the game. I'm really optimistic that policing is going to change. It might not change today. It might take 5 years, 10 years. You know, when I was a cop, it was a reactive department. Somebody got shot, we show up, put the yellow tape, go. Now today in policing, somebody gets shot, cops in the back saying, well, hey, Rico is his friend. Let's check out Rico. Oh, Carmen is his girlfriend. Let's check out. So it's more proactive now you know, and now with these cameras, with these national incidents, cops are, one, they're afraid. I have a daughter that's a cop and a nephew that's a detective. One, they're afraid, and two, nobody wants to lose their job.
Mm.
Nobody wants to lose their job. And they know if they end up on the national news, suspension with no pay, or, you know, the family's embarrassed. It's tough being a cop today. It's really tough. But like I always tell every cops when I'm speaking to cops, McDonald's is always hiring. You don't have to take the job. But if you take it, you need to make sure and ensure that you treat everybody with respect. It is tough, yeah, but it's going to come back around. Remember, everybody loved the police, especially after 9/11. You couldn't see a cop without you tell them how much you love them. And now you see a cop, you hate him. Everybody's telling them to hate him. And the cops just got to get thick skin. They'll get past this, but there has to be some reconstruction or some reform, and definitely defund it. Without a doubt, you have to defund these police budgets.
Mm. Speaking of that, talking about defunding and how that just became the topic of discussion, or one of the many topics of discussion, but ranking high up on the list of 2020. A lot of major cities started to follow suit. So we have at least 8 major cities in the US that passed legislation to defund the police forces. So it includes also, you know, the biggies. You got Los Angeles and New York City. The portion of those city budgets that would have normally just gone to the police departments for whatever, more police on the force or what have you, they've been actually diverted to violence prevention or social programs or other parallel initiatives. But could these cities be seen as, I guess, setting a trend, or just as like petri dishes? So it's kind of like a wait and see situation, or is it just too soon to tell what's going to happen? Carmen.
I think it is a little too soon to tell. I want to see where they're going to actually put the money, right? It's one thing to say we are going to defund, and like, for example, the city of Seattle, our city council promised last summer that they were, or pledged in the height of the political arena that they were going to cut our budget by 50%. In reality, they barely cut the budget by 20. And so I think there's a lot of lip service going into, especially by politicians. Everything is political. That's something I've learned. Everything is political. And I think, especially when it's election season, you want to say whatever your constituents want to hear. And so there's one thing to say, like, yeah, let's defund the police and let's cut the budgets, right? And we have seen some success with that. But I do want to wait and see where the money goes and how they decide to prioritize funding communities of color and marginalized communities. For example, I think the city of Seattle has promised $100 million to benefit communities of color. I want to see where it goes. I want to see how it benefits those communities. And the thing about the defund the police movement, this isn't a short-term game, it's a long-term game. And so the research and the studying, it has to start now. We have to start looking at these cities who are defunding their police departments and refunding social services, refunding healthcare, and study and see what happens, what the results are. And that's where I'm really hoping that, like, my criminal justice colleagues who have been really abrasive to the defund the police movement and have been opposed to it, will use this as an opportunity to start new research and looking into what it looks like to defund the police and how it can be successful. Because in terms of militarization, we live in a very militarized society. I mean, our military is one of the most funded militaries in the world, right? Our police department is kind of a reflection of that. And I think that's a societal, cultural thing, that the idea that we need power and control in order to regulate our society. And I just want to see us shift away from that mentality of seeing law enforcement as, a way to police our way through all of these social issues that we can't police our way through anymore. And so I want to see how they're going to fund everything. And so that's going to take a couple more years of study and observation and to see what the long-term results are going to be. But what I do hope is that they stick with it and that they correct their mistakes and they study where they put the money and they do it in a beneficial way. And I really, really hope that the cities are listening to their communities and they're asking their communities and their marginalized communities where they want this money funded.
Good point. Corey, you have anything to add?
I think she pretty much knocked it out the park.
Okay.
I agree.
Now, Carmen, I want to ask you, just following up. So you mentioned a little bit about seeing where the money goes and understanding that we can't police our way out of these social problems. So I wanted you to kind of help our attendees kind of connect the dots with the chain of the chain reaction of how social problems kind of like uh, are fostered in society, and how the policing is seen as the remedy, if that makes any sense.
It does. And I'm an academic, and so I'm just going to speak as an academic. When I was studying criminal justice in my undergrad and my graduate degree, in my graduate years, we studied all the different theories behind crime. Why do people commit crime? You learn about social control theory, and you learn about strain theory, and you learn about all these labeling theories and all these different theories on why people commit crime. The thing is, when you look at the theorists and the people who are coming up with these theories, they're all cis white men. And then we look at our politicians, predominantly are cis white men. We look at who has created these systems of policing and prisons and our politics. We look at who controls our media outlets. I watched that Netflix documentary, Crack, after being asked to be on this panel. It was a great documentary. I really recommend people to watch it. And it was really a kind of, if you watch it, you see how we created our own problem. The United States created its problem with crack cocaine, and then created the solution, all in the interim, hurting people of color and Black communities and essentially killing Black communities. And so we look at policing as like this Band-Aid of a solution to, poverty, to starvation, to mental health, to all of these other things, because it's kind of an instant fix. And it goes hand in hand with the prison abolition movement, right? The prison abolition movement, I think our prisons went up like 700% between like the 1980s and now. In the last 40 years, we have seen our prison population expand erroneously, right? And it's that idea of out of sight, out of mind, right? You mess up, you commit a crime, you're no longer a functional member of the society, you have to go to prison, and we're just going to remove you, right? But that doesn't work. It isn't effective, because we've only seen increased amounts of people becoming incarcerated and also increased amounts of recidivism. And so unfortunately, you can't look at the institutions of white supremacy and of cis white men in politics who have created these broken systems to fix what they've broken. It doesn't make sense in my mind. And so that's where we have to look at the conversations around abolition and defunding, and bringing in people like Angela Davis and, like I mentioned, Bruce Wilson Gilmore, and people who are invested in their communities and Black communities in helping solve this problem. I don't think we can rely on police anymore. I don't think it's working anymore. It may have worked for a period, and even then, I hate saying that, because the way I study history and the way I teach is history explains itself. And police have been used time and time again to keep the status quo. And so when we look at the abolition of slavery in the 1800s, right, we saw the establishment of Jim Crow laws, a direct result of white, cis, racist politicians who wanted to keep Black people out of power, Black people out of wealth, and wanted to keep them marginalized. And you saw the police during the Civil Rights Movement who were beating down protesters, who were refusing to let them peacefully protest. Martin Luther King Jr. himself was arrested however many times, but we don't talk about all of that. We watched the BLM protests this last summer, and I was watching them on my computer. I was watching them on TV. I was watching Twitter on my phone, because I wasn't out there myself, but I had students out there. I had friends out there. And it hurt me to see how police would respond, because I knew the environment they were in. So police are upset because their feelings are hurt, that they're no longer seen as the heroes, and that they're continually being scrutinized and they're continually being criticized. I mean, you continually criticize anybody, they're going to get very upset, they're going to get emotional, they're going to get in their feels, right? But then you put them in SWAT uniform and you tell them to go protect and serve, enforce law and order. In that same mindset, in this culture, that's not working effectively anymore, and we saw that. And Corey brought up CHOP, or the Capitol Hill zone, that as an example of the lack of policing. That's a horrible example. We don't want to use CHOP as an example of what it looks like if there's no police, because that's the fear mongering, kind of the myth the myth behind abolition. The myth behind abolition and defunding is let's deinstitutionalize, let's defund, let's let out all the criminals and see where the chips fall. That's not reality. That's not what we're asking for. I'm an academic. I'm a smart person. That's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking for us to look at the last 150 years of our country, look at how much money we put into law enforcement in the last 150 years in our country, look at how much money we put into prisons in the last 150 years of our country, and look at how we've also funded all the other things that cause crime, like we just talked about in the beginning of this question: poverty, stress, mental health,
racism,
trauma, abuse, racism, thank you, racism, all of these things, and attack those things rather than having try to police our way out of them, because it's not working anymore. And if history does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And in LA, we saw the Watts riots in 1965. We saw the Rodney King riots in the early 1990s. And most recently, have seen riots since the 2010, 2014, and now 2020 eras, begging people to listen and be like, this isn't working anymore. Because as much as my experience and Corey's experiences are very valid, people's experiences who are very afraid and do not trust the police are also valid. And that's a growing number. And I'm glad that we're listening to them more, because again, it isn't a long-term solution. If policing were a long-term solution, we would be in a much better place in our society now than we are in reality.
Okay. Now, Corey, before I ask you for your side of that, I want to just go ahead and tell all the attendees who are watching out there, if you'd like to ask the panelists a question, because I'm just going to ask them 2 more questions and we'll open up the actual floor to you to ask them questions directly. You can just raise your hand and we'll actually let you ask the questions live. If you don't feel like speaking, you can just drop your question into the Q&A and I'll read the actual question to the panelists myself. So with that being said, Corey, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Which was the question again?
So she was just talking about, actually, you know what, we can discuss this program in New York City, actually. I think I would really like to hear your opinion on this. So recently, New York just announced that it was gonna launch a pilot program, which would dispatch mental health and crisis professionals to like certain calls instead of sending police officers. But the program is only gonna be tested in 2 high need areas in the city. So do police departments keep data on how many 911 calls are actually the result of someone in a mental health crisis? And what will happen if the program is successful? Do you think it'll be adopted citywide?
Oh, yeah. They definitely keep data. And since the CompStat era in 93, 94, since we saw computer statistics, the NYPD is the leader in this CompStat era, and statistics are everything. As a commander, I knew, like in my one precinct, I had 250,000 calls a year for something. Like I would have a whole list of how those 250, how did they break down mental health, assaults, shootings, so on and so forth. So they definitely have the data. They're going to roll out this program. It started now. It's supposed to start in February in 2 areas. I was concerned about, they didn't tell us which areas they was going to start in. But now, today, the city council, they just announced maybe like 2 or 3 months ago, they have a lot of changes coming down in the NYPD. They're looking to take power from the police commissioner, have the police commissioner actually go in front of the city council to be sworn in. You know, not the mayor picks, I'm picking Corey Pegues as the commissioner, but now you got to go in front of the city council. They're talking about putting school safety officers in plain clothes, which I'm definitely an advocate for, and taking weapons from them and giving them some, you know, emotionally disturbed person training to help these young kids. I don't think police should be in buildings, period. They're also talking about having principals of the schools have a say in which school safety officer is going to be in my school. Or like, I don't like Rico. He's mean and nasty to the kids. Remove him out of my building. And don't leave it for the police to say, nah, Rico, we'll talk to Rico. No, I'm telling you, I'm here with him every single day. He or she needs to go. So there's a lot of changes coming down. And every pilot program that the NYPD has, if it's successful, they're definitely going to spread it out. But this is the way of the country. I know in Philadelphia, they just started it maybe 2 months ago. They just started. Now to get a call with somebody in mental distress, they're sending mental health professionals. Look, this stuff ain't rocket science. It's not rocket science. If it was rocket science, I'll be at NASA making a whole bunch of money. It's not. Most cops, police departments, they got high school diplomas. You know, most of them got high school diplomas or 30 credits. They're not rocket science. So we can fix this, but you got to get this chip off police shoulders, like Carmen said. Their feelings get hurt because we have created this society like it's the big bad police. You know, we talk about like the slave patrols and stuff. You got to understand, cops in uniform was catching black boys and girls and bringing them to the hanging. This was the cop bringing them to the hanging. So we have a whole bunch of issues with policing for hundreds of years, for years and years and years. All right. So it has to change. Something has to change because what's happening now is not working. And again, I know that a lot of the cops that I work with that had good hearts, they were good people. And I'm gonna tell you this, and I don't know if you ever heard this before, but policing is the one profession that you can go into and don't be racist and leave racist. For instance, a white guy could come into policing. He's in his white area. That's all he worked in. He comes into policing, and the way that they treat black people, he'll start hating black people. And then a black person come into policing, not racist, he's gonna start hating white people because of the way the white cops are treating the black people in the community. It's one of the only professions that you could come in, be ready to just like, live the American dream, house, 2 cars, white picket fence, but you're gonna leave racist. And I'm telling you, I've seen it so many times, and I will always tell my cops and everybody, they talk implicit bias. I don't even really like that training with implicit bias because everybody, like, I don't eat pork or red meat. You're not gonna make me eat it. No matter what you tell me, I'm not eating it. So if I don't like white people, you're not gonna make me like them. Everybody has implicit biases. All I would always demand of them is for 8 hours and 35 minutes, keep that to yourself. You need to go out here and treat people with respect. Because if I catch you do one thing wrong, now you're gonna have to deal with me because I'm the attitude adjuster. But you can't train a racist to be unracist. It's not gonna happen. So are some cops going to slip through the system and have some implicit biases? Yeah, they're going to have some. But I think it's up to the leadership because policing is a paramilitary organization, meaning I tell you what to do, you do it. There's no democratic society here. I tell you, sit, you go stand over there. That's what you do. All right. So if it's top-down leadership, and speaking about Minneapolis, for the life of me, I can't understand how a black police chief in that police department allow a white cop with 18 years on patrol, 3 shootings, 1 person he killed to actually be the training officer that day when 95% of cops go 20 years and don't fire a weapon. So that's the other thing with when a black or Hispanic in charge. Well, hey, in Minneapolis, George Floyd got killed. You had a black police chief. And in his defense, he was there for about 6 weeks. But it's not the NYPD. If you can't get through 2,000 people in 6 weeks, it ain't like you had to go through 40,000 people. The first thing, as soon as you got there, you should have been calling internal affairs and saying, let's go to everybody with disciplinary records. Oh, this guy, he's a training officer? No, pull him off the streets right now. That's not what I want out here on the streets. So, but policing, what I do know about policing from being heavily involved in it is to go along, to get along. Like Carmen, no one wants to make the tough decision. Everyone wants to be liked. No one wants to do the job the right way.
Carmen, you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think I became familiar with this new pilot program. I'm very excited to hear more about it. I think, we talked about this a little bit. Police have become like the catch-all for everything. We call 911. We were almost like the first phone number you learned as a kid was 911. You called them for everything. And so I think changing how we respond to 911 calls is a great first step. I think it's great to not have police officers respond to every 911 call because they aren't needed and they do escalate situations and they can make them worse because when you train someone to be a hammer, everything's a nail, right? And we have this idea of like community-oriented policing, and you might be able to sit through a training and be able to practice it, but in the height of the moment, when they're not able to do it effectively or execute these rules effectively that are supposed to protect people, then that's when we have to kind of, I think take away more power away from the police and put it in the hands of like mental health professionals and other professionals who are more better trained and equipped to handle such matters.
Now to that, if it was successful, do you feel like Seattle would be a city that would kind of like follow suit?
I would hope so. I think there's actually a great question here from my colleague, Jacqueline Helfgott. And if you don't mind, I can even read what she has to say. she says the Seattle Police has had co-responder teams since 2010. And just last year expanded to 5 co-responder teams where a mental health professional and a CIT trained officer are partnered to co-respond to incidents involving behavioral crisis, and SPD has had a crisis intervention unit since 1998. So that is just the start of what Seattle PD is doing. Her question, though, is what are her thoughts on the existing co-responder teams based on how these sorts of existing co-responder teams based on the CIT model can be utilized as we move forward. There's a lot of talk of the Coots in Oregon and what about the cities that have implemented CIT training co-responder terms in the cities. What are your thoughts on how these reforms can be utilized moving forward? The defund movement can potentially draw funds away from these sorts of reforms to increase crisis intervention, de-escalation, and policing. How can we build in existing reforms like co-responder teams and CIT training and programs with police agencies while supporting the vision of defunding proponents? And my answer to that is moving power again away from the police. And I think moving that towards a program like we have in New York, where it's just mental health professionals and only mental health professionals, rather than having co-responder teams. Because as there was a really great op-ed piece, and the author of the op-ed piece is escaping me at the moment, but it's Miriam Kaba, and she wrote, "Yes, we literally mean defund the police." Right. And what I want to say about her op-ed and what is being said here is that we see an increase of police brutality through police contact. And so the only way we're going to see a lessen amount of police brutality is to lessen that police contact. And so I would say we need to put money towards standalone mental health agencies like Cahoots that can respond to mental health crises and 911 calls and not have police respond. I think we need to, again, take power away from the police, take money away from the police, and put towards organizations and programs that are actually going to solve these non-violent, non-emergent, non-police needed situations for professionals who can actually handle them. Because like Corey talked about, police officers get about 6 months of training, and some of that training they don't even want, right? And you're not going to make a racist police officer not racist. Now, I am an EDI, implicit bias trainer, so I will have to say, like, I do those trainings, and I do think they work, because some people aren't aware of their biases. Some people aren't aware that you have a bias towards this type of person or this type of person. So I've seen in the field I work in, those trainings be actually effective when done properly and effectively. But again, you're not going to change a racist person's way of thinking or their ideology. In the end, they just can't be a cop. And if we can't get rid of the problem officers or the people or the police officers who are going to break the rules and break the rules of reform that we've been building to try to for the betterment of policing, then we need to reduce police contact and reduce police power.
Thank you for that. So we have another question actually from Jay. Jay's question is, how can the blue wall be addressed? I understand them looking out for the team. It's human nature, but how can police themselves? Maybe Corey, you can speak to that first.
Yeah, well, the first two things. One, there's really no blue wall. I'm telling you this. Cops are ratting on, they're all ratting on one another. It probably was a blue wall back like in the 70s, and there wasn't so much oversight, but now like cops are ratting on everybody, but they still have some that's still standing strong with, I'm my brother's keeper, you don't say anything. Because when you're putting a cop in the back room and saying, listen, you're facing 10 years, you're about to lose your house. What happened on the scene? Today, they're like, Rico did it. Okay, I'm just telling, I'd rather lose 20 vacation days and people don't like me, but I'm not going to prison. So I don't think the blue wall is as big as it used to be when it was like back in the 70s and 60s and stuff, but it's still there a little bit. The other piece was,
how can we trust police to police themselves?
Right, police can't police themselves. I'm saying it, I've been saying it, they cannot police themselves. Look at New York City, they have so much oversight. You have the Eastern District, you have Internal Affairs, you have CCRB, you have about 5 different entities, but they're all laying in the bed with the police. So the police can't police the police. It's just like whenever, like a Mike Brown, when he's Eric Garner, you have the local DA prosecuting these crimes. How could you have the local DA prosecuting that crime? the DA is laying in bed with the cops, not literally, but it's not even about the Mike Brown case. It's about the other 100 cases I have in the office. It's like, if I convict this cop, none of the cops are going to talk to us to get rid of this other cases. And DAs, you know, their job performance is case clearance. That's what it is. So why are you putting a local municipality to prosecute a cop? We can just see with Ahmaud Arbery out in Atlanta, what happened out there, because, you know, the guys that killed him, they knew the local DA. So I'm also, whenever there's a police involved shooting where the bullet hit flesh, it should be a special prosecutor. It should be coming straight from the governor's office, special prosecutor. Nobody that's good. Police cannot police the police. We've seen it so many times. We just had an NYPD. They just had to fire the head of the EEOC. They had to fire him. He was in charge of dealing with all racial discrimination cases. And guess what he was doing on his free time? And this is a deputy inspector, an executive, 3 steps away from being a police commissioner. He was on these platforms, Proud Boys and stuff, making all these racist statements. It's like, again, the police can't police the police because it's all like, oh, that was my nephew who got this case. Yo, my uncle, I used to work with his father. That's what it is. It's the good old boy network. Get rid of the good old boy network, bring outsiders in. And I'm even so far, and I know some of my friends are probably on here are going to see this, and I'm so into this that I'm saying, hey, all police commissioners in America, or police chiefs, however you want to call them, they should be civilians. Like, they shouldn't have no police experience, because at that level, you just need leadership. You don't need nobody with police background to be a police commissioner. A good leader will surround himself with some law enforcement people and say, hey, I got this, these are the ideas. Bring somebody from Wall Street, Fortune 500. Leaders are leaders. Leaders lead. You don't need to like be so far into the police cycle to know how to run a police department. It's just leadership. If you got good leader executive staff, they're gonna train you up. You're gonna be able to do it. This stuff is not rocket science.
Thanks for that. We have another question from Miranda. We're going to ask Miranda to actually deliver her question live. Miranda, you have the mic.
Can you guys hear me?
We can. Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to ask both of your guys' opinion on the relationship between police abolition and prison abolition. Right now, there's a big conversation happening about police abolition, and do you believe that initial abolition of police would over time result in prison abolition as well?
I think, yeah, it should. It's just almost like one and the same. Obviously, if we abolish police, then we need less prisons. We need less prisons. We should be getting rid of prisons now anyway. Everybody in jail for these menial drug charges should be released at a stroke of a pen from the President of the United States. Everybody, and I don't care what drug it is. I don't even care what drug it is, unless they show like 100 kilos of cocaine. Listen, let them out. They don't need to be in jail. You're not going to reform them by putting them in jail. That's the first way we can just get rid of in private prisons. I know the President of the United States, the new President Biden, he just signed an executive order to stop funding, I believe, Carmen, stop funding private prisons. So, you know, that conversation is on the horizon, but we have so many people in jail that's unnecessary, and we need to abolish the prison system.
I say, like, because my background is in juvenile justice and working in juvenile institutions for the state of Washington, I think we're going to see the prioritization of the prison abolition movement over police. And I think we're going to see the end of prisons before we see the end of police, in my opinion. I think because for example, in Seattle, we saw the zero use detention movement take off, where they no longer wanted to see our youth being incarcerated and sent into detention and sent into state institutions. And I think we're now looking at how grossly we populate our prisons. And the fact that we even have privatized prisons, to me, is just a huge problem. But we need to see the closures of those. And I think we need to see more diversion, dispositional alternatives, where we see sanctions and solutions that keep people in the community, invested in the community, working with their community. Because that out of sight, out of mind, shipping them 5 hours away where their family can barely visit them, that doesn't work. It isn't effective, and it is a second form of slavery. Our prison system isn't effective. It's very problematic. And I prioritize that movement a little bit more than police abolition, but I do think they're kind of one and the same, and they go hand in hand, because you're looking at two institutions that are basically the product of white supremacy, that have grown in this country and absorbed so much money that could be rerouted in so many more effective manners, because everything for me comes down to politics and money. And so I would like to see the end of prisons before I see the end of police, and the end of, and not to say the end. I really want to maybe reframe it to making prisons and police obsolete. Let's change that. I want to see prisons and police be made obsolete, as in working towards the betterment of society as a whole, where we don't need either.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay. Well, everybody, that seems to conclude our time today for this discussion about the abolition or defunding of police. I'd like to thank both of our panelists, Carmen Rivera and Pegues, for their time and their generosity and their expertise. I would like to ask both of our panelists to just tell everyone where they can follow you and all of your efforts, in case they want more information about what you're doing or how they can actually contribute to the defunding or the abolition of the police.
Carmen?
Well, you can follow me on all my social medias. It's Carmen Rivera, or on Instagram __ Coco Amelia. That is one of my nicknames. So it's Coco Amelia or Carmen Rivera is where you can find me. I'm also going to throw my email in the chat for anybody who is interested in reaching out. I am always up for a conversation and education. And so please feel free to reach out to me, connect with me. Be happy to work with anybody.
Yes, thank you. And you can find me, just go to my website, CoreyPegues.com, and all of my social media platforms are there. My Twitter is CPegues90, CPegues, Instagram is CPegues9098. And look out for me, Netflix and Crack, February 12th and 13th. I'll be on FX and Hulu, and a new documentary called Hip Hop Untold. My documentary is called A Cops and Robbers Story, is being shown at the Big Sky Film Festival, February 20th to the 23rd. And it's only $10, so go online and order your ticket, your virtual ticket, and have a party at home with your friends and family. And I have a second book coming out called If I Was a Superhero in the Next Year. Thanks for having me, Rico. And thank you for putting this together. This is a very important topic of conversation, and I'm quite sure you'll have us back on, because these police are not going to stop what they're doing out here until there's some serious change. But thank you for what you're doing to bring this to the light.
It's all for the cause. It's all for the cause. I appreciate both of you and everything that you're doing. And I'd like to thank everybody else out there for tuning in. And hopefully you've gotten some food for thought and understand what it means to reimagine public safety. Take care. Have a good night. Stay safe and stay warm.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you so much.